I was not broken by that system. I went on to achieve, and we never talk about the good that happened. You know, the kids who were there, we had to live through some things that were horrific, but we achieved and we moved on. And I wish that that would be part of the messaging, that despite all the violence and all of the stuff that went on with the adults, the children did move on and we did have full lives.
Welcome, everyone. So I'm Leah Rosovsky. I'm the director of the Boston Athenaeum, and it's really a pleasure to welcome you here this evening. We are so excited to be partnering with the Boston Globe on this program, which is called The Lens of Change, the Garrity Decision in Focus. And when we started talking about this, this is a subject of such interest and excitement, I think, for all of us who have a connection to the city, and for many of our members who are here, and for those of you who are here for the first time. This was a conversation that was of interest to us for many, many reasons. Among other things, the Athenaeum is a collector of material about Boston's history. It's really at the heart of what we do. One interesting fact is that in the period when all of this was taking place, the school committee was actually across the street. It was at 15 Beacon Street. So some of what happened would have been happening right outside our doors. And then beyond that, we are also serious collectors of photography. We collect photography both, we have a historical collection of photography, and we collect in the present. So all of those were reasons why this was of particular interest to us as we're thinking about this really profound moment in Boston's history. And we're so excited to hear what the panel has to share with us. So it's my privilege in all of this to get to introduce Nancy Barnes. So Nancy is, as I'm sure you know, the editor of the Boston Globe, and she is an impeccable journalist. But in this role, she is much, much more than her journalistic acumen. She's an inspirational leader for an institution that is of huge importance to this city. And she is somebody who is managing phenomenally in a moment of incredible change in the whole world of news and in our society as well. So please join me in welcoming someone we are very lucky to have in the city of Boston, Nancy Barnes.
Thank you. That was a very kind introduction. Thank you. We are very grateful to the Boston Athenaeum for your partnership and for hosting us in this remarkable space. I didn't tell you, but I have been a member for the last year, and I have explored this space, and it's just really so, it is a remarkable building, so thank you. And on behalf of the team at the Boston Globe, we thank you for joining us here for this important conversation, whether you're here in person or joining us virtually. Last summer, we hosted a conversation in Roxbury on Boston's busing legacy, and we published an 11-story series around desegregation and busing that took many months and many hands to produce. Some of those special sections are back in that room where you're going to see the photographers and the photographs, and I urge you to take a look at it because it's just really remarkable to hold it in your hands. This conversation that we're about to have was based on the 1974 court-ordered busing decision that was meant to integrate Boston public schools, the opportunity that Black parents had hoped would lead to better schools for their children, but it never happened, which is something that we have always reported. Now, 50 years after Federal District Court Judge W. Arthur Garrity's desegregation order, Boston public schools continue to operate a system that leaves many Black and Latino students behind. Tonight, we reflect on this historic decision through the lens and eyes of those who experienced the desegregation era firsthand and for those who documented it. And just as a personal aside, so I grew up in Boston suburban schools, which were 100% white students, and the desegregation order came down the year after I left Boston, so we observed it as a family from afar, and it was really something to behold. And and just a sad record on Boston's history. The photographs that you will see as part of this exhibit are powerful and visceral. Some of them are very difficult to absorb, but they tell a story that all these years later is important to hold on to and which continues to ripple through modern Boston and beyond. You will also hear from journalists who are still telling the story of busing 50 years later. Together, we will also examine how media coverage of anti-busing protests solidified Boston's reputation as a city marked by racial strife. I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's discussion, Melissa Taboada. She's the editor of the Globe's award-winning Great Divide education team, which investigates educational inequities in Boston and throughout the state. And thank you to the Bar Foundation, which helps support this team. Melissa's team and other key journalists in the newsroom led our work on the legacy of busing and the desegregation for this series. And Melissa has just done a tremendous leadership job for the last year in bringing all this together. And this is one of several conversations that she's hosted. And I hope that you're in for really a revealing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, for that introduction. And with that, I would like to invite our panelists to come up and take their seats. The first panelist is Dr. Denise Pruitt. And Denise is the chair of Health Studies at MassBay Community College, which includes medical assisting and phlebotomy, and teaches community health at Tufts Medical School. Also known as Chief Ladybug, she is an Indigenous American with the Croatan, Massachusetts Praying Indian, and the Potawatomi affiliations. I apologize. Denise also is one of the original plaintiffs in the landmark Morgan v. Hennigan, which required Boston to desegregate via busing. Her mother was a plaintiff, and she was named in that, and she experienced busing first time, and we'll be talking about her personal experiences in all of this. So Denise was bused from Dorchester to Hyde Park High from 1975 to 1978. Our next panelist is Ulrike Welsch. She is a German native, and she moved to the U.S. in 1964. She was the first female news staff photographer in Boston, starting first at the Boston Herald Traveler in 1966 before joining the Globe in 1971 and staying until 1981. And during this time, Uli was named Press Photographer of the Year by the New England Press Photographers Association, and she and the Boston Globe received a Pulitzer Prize for their coverage of desegregation and busing in Boston. Her human interest images changed the looks of Boston's news dailies, and she also lectured at the Center for Lifelong Learning at Harvard University. And our final panelist is one of my colleagues, Bill Greene. He is the Director of Photography at the Boston Globe. He leads a staff of 20 visual journalists and at the Globe and its website, bostonglobe.com. He started his career at the Patriot Ledger in Quincy before moving to the Globe, where he was a staff photographer for 28 years, before becoming director in 2014. Bill was awarded National Photographer of the Year honors twice in the Pictures of the Year competition and 13 times for the Boston Press Photographers Association. Among his other awards are the Robert F. Kennedy International Photojournalism Award for his story on the Lost Boys of Sudan, as well as a first place award in the World Press Photo Competition for his coverage of the Mississippi River flooding of 1993. A Pulitzer finalist, he is also a 4-time Emmy Award winner and a 2-time Edward R. Mora winner for multimedia work produced at the Globe. So I just want to jump in. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your night with us. We will also be looking at some of the photos from the desegregation period. Some of them are very gripping. Some of them may be difficult to view, but they are a beautiful way to mark a really horrible period of Boston's history. So I just want to start the first questions with Uli and Denise, and we'll start with Denise. I'd like for you to discuss your experience during the busing era as a student who was bused, and if you could be a specific interaction that you had witnessed during that time, or something that you just want to share personally.
Sure. So I remember the very first day of school. My mother walking my brother and myself around. We lived on a small street. We went around to the main street where the bus was going to pick us up. There were police, there were cameramen, there were, just a slew of people there waiting at the bus. I was 13, I was starting high school, I was so excited. I was gonna get a locker, I was gonna make new friends. Didn't really understand all that was going to happen. Leaving my neighborhood, all my friends who I had known right up to 8th grade, my brother and I were the only two getting on the bus at that stop. It did make 2 more stops after us, and then it headed into Hyde Park. I wanted to look out the window because I was so excited about, all there was to see. And as we got close to Metropolitan Ave, where Hyde Park High School was, my brother told me I had to move to the middle. I couldn't sit next to the window. He saw all of the angry people. They started probably about a mile before we got to the school. The streets were just lined with very angry people who were throwing things and calling names. So he made me sit on the inside. So I didn't get to see much till I got up to the high school. When we got up to the high school, we had to wait for the police to sort of make a corridor for us to walk through because there were so many adults there. They were spitting at us and throwing things at us and calling us names, and they sort of got us off the bus in an orderly manner and then brought us up this beautiful staircase up to the front of the school, where we then had dogs who had to sniff us, and then we had to go through metal detectors and have these wands over our bodies, and then we sort of got into the school. They brought us all into a big room first and just sort of talked to us and just said, stay together, you'll be safe. They wanted to reassure us that what was going on outside of the building wouldn't be going on the inside of the building. I was 13 years old. I had no idea all that was going on, but all I knew is there were all these angry people. So they did take me to my classroom. We had a little bit of an orientation. I sat next to a young girl who she and I became friends. We're still friends to this day. I made a lot of friends at school. And what was going on the outside of the building was not the same thing going on the inside of the building. The children who were there wanted to learn. The children who were there wanted to make friends and have a high school experience. We all wanted a high school experience, and unfortunately, the adults did not want us to have a high school experience. So it was scary, but it was exciting at the same time, and I have said this to people over and over again. I am a product of the Boston Public Schools and desegregation, and I am very proud. And I will talk about it till the day I die because I think it was very necessary, although my mother did not get what she sued for, and what she sued for was quality education. She was looking for it to mimic what the suburban kids were getting. We never got that. They bused poor children from Dorchester into poor Hyde Park, and that's what we got. But you know what? I stuck with it. I stayed at the school. I graduated from the school, and I represent the school because I believe in desegregation, and I believe in education, which is why I'm an educator.
Thank you so much. Now, Uli, you were there during this time, and you were typically a features photographer and weren't necessarily assigned to hard news, but given the importance of desegregation, you're pulled to capture the images of that time. How did you approach that role, and what were some of your experiences being on the outside, trying to capture the photos of what was going on, as well as the photos inside the school?
Yeah, there were different opportunities I had. A few times I was sent to photograph a class inside, and that was relatively easy. I looked for a good mixture and hopefully some activities, like, kids raising their hands or so. But what I had to do regularly, and I say had to because I didn't like it, like you said, I was looking, my actual thing in photography was to look for beauty, to look for human interest pictures, and now I was assigned to go every day at 7 o'clock a.m. To South Boston High to photograph the kids who were being bussed in, black children, to walk into school passing the police. So I kind of had to look for something which showed what was going on, which wasn't always great because, the policemen were so strong and the kids were wandering, they were looking sideways. And sometimes it was rough because there was one time some incident inside the school, and now the whole neighborhood of South Boston came and demonstrated. They wanted to watch when the kids were leaving. And this was a very high time. It was frightening. And at one point, the people around me, I was there every day, so the people from South Boston identified me with the Boston Globe. And all of a sudden, they shouted profanities at me and started pulling at my camera case and so on. And one of the writing colleagues, Bob Ward was his name, he stood next to me and said, "Uli, keep your cool." Because at first I answered back because I said, what did you write yesterday in the Globe, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't write, I photograph. But like my colleague said, keep your cool, shut up. And then when they started pulling at my camera case, that was a very frightening thing because it was a mob. And then Bob Ward said, "Uli, I think we're going for a walk." And you see, we journalists were between the demonstrators, and there was a dead zone, kind of nobody, and then there was the police. So, I was being walked over to the police chief, and he looked at me, and he saw at that point I was crying and I was trembling, and he said, "I understand." And so, because nobody was allowed to go through this dead zone. But as a whole, it was like you had just said, inside in the school, actually, the kids got along. They played, they helped each other in the yard and so on. And then leaving the school, parents were outside and were shouting. And this was very, very sad. It was very conflicting,
Yeah. Denise, this is your life. This was the experience of your life. And during the time, you had the Ulis of the world there, TV cameras, reporters, photographers, angling to document it. How did that make you feel, having that aspect of your life being documented in that way? And what do you think the news got right, and what did we get wrong?
Me?
Denise.
So I didn't mind the cameras being there because it needed to be documented, it needed to be seen. What I think that they got right is having a presence and taking those photos so we can historically look back at it. What I think that they got wrong is all we ever talk about is the violence and all the bad things that happen. But what about the good things? What about the kids? I went on and went to college. I have 3 doctorate degrees. I was not broken by that system. I went on to achieve, and we never talk about the good that happened. The kids who were there, we had to live through some things that were horrific. But we achieved and we moved on. And I wish that would be part of the messaging, that despite all the violence and all of the stuff that went on with the adults, the children did move on and we did have full lives. And so that's the piece that I think's missing. And that's why I come to these talks, because I like for people to know You know, my mother raised 9 children on her own. I'm number 7 of 9. She took the time to sue the Boston Public Schools, not just for her 9 children, but for all children. She still, to this day, she is 90 years old, and she is advocating for her great-grandchildren. She sits at the table with them. She does homework with them. I mean, she has always been an advocate for education, and all of her kids were all college graduates. Her grandchildren are college graduates, and now her great-grandchildren are going into college. And so that's the story that needs to be told, that desegregation did not break us. We continue to achieve, and we continue to this day to fight that fight.
Thank you. Bill, you weren't a photographer during that period, but you now oversee the photo department at the Globe. And if a crisis like this happens again, how do you feel like you would be handling it as head of the photo department? And what kind of direction or advice would you give your staff when it comes to documenting such moments?
Thanks, Melissa. In any news story, when things happen, the most important thing is just to get there as soon as possible. I mean, you realize history is unfolding before your eyes. You have no idea how long it's going to last. I think of the Back to the Boston Marathon. Some things hit you immediately where you either race to the flame or you don't. And John Tamaki, one of our outstanding photographers, abandoned all personal risk and just flew towards where the news was because it happens that quickly. Stories like this are totally different. They're more like slow burns. They start as maybe it's a protest, and it's so drawn out, the impact and the import of the event isn't always initially really apparent. On a story like this, I think looking back at the photos, which by the way was an unbelievable treat with our head of visuals, Tim Rasmussen, and I have to mention Leanne Burton, Seidel, and Colby Cotter, who we went through thousands of old black and white images, digitizing some of them for the first time. It was a treasure hunt, and just very exciting to see some of the images that were made. Things I like to see, to Denise, I think makes a really great point, that it's a moth that's driven to the flame. It's always the conflict, the rocks through the window, the profanity, the fingers, that everyone gloms onto. I think the powers the photos that last the longest often and have the most power are the subtle ones. You know, there are slight moments of joy or anticipation. Could we have gotten into someone's house the night before the first night of busing? What was going on in at the kitchen table? Like, that would have been, I've never seen that photo. That would have been incredibly powerful. Other moments that are quiet, I think, inside the schools, more photos from inside the school would have just, to show what Denise was talking about. I'm always drawn to trying to flesh out the story, not the obvious, but also get the quiet, emotional moments to tell the story.
Thank you. This will be to both Uli and Denise, and we'll start with Uli. Are there any decisions you made back then as a staff photographer who was documenting this that you would have done differently if it were now?
No, today I'm so far removed from this, so I don't quite know what I would have done. I mean, I have a newer head. I always try to be a mouse in a classroom, you know, that people get used to me and then be themselves for pictures, and I would have done the same. But like maybe what Bill was mentioning about going to the people's home before they're packing up their bag would have been a good idea. Yeah, we didn't do that, so perhaps that would have been good, and I'm sure there are photographers who would do that nowadays. Yeah, I was just sent certain places, and I followed what I was sent to and looked for something visual. You know, like I said, I also went inside schools and got the classrooms or the schoolyards, and I went to bus stops and I photographed the kids going on the bus not all the pictures are here, you know. Yeah, I don't know what I would have done much different. It's a different time for me too. I've grown up too.
And Denise, what about you? Is there any decision that you had made that you would do differently?
I would get on that bus 10 times over. I would put my children on the bus, I would put my grandchildren on the bus, because we needed to have desegregation happen so that the world can see that all children, not just white children, all children deserve a quality education. And the fight that we had to fight, I would fight it today.
Thank you. You know, I want to talk about an image that sticks in your memories. There are images here on the screen behind us, but is there one image that really just sticks in your mind from that era? Uli, you can go first.
Well, the image I have is that little boy looking out of the bus when he was getting on the bus, and his mom was out. I assume his mom was outside. And it showed to me a certain sadness, but I was a beauty photographer. I mean, not that I was photographing only beautiful people, but it was such a beautiful boy. He had those cute little eyelashes and the mood, and that was a picture which is in my heart, you know.
Yeah, I look at him and I want to cry.
Yeah, he has a little wet eyes. It appears that way,
Yeah.
you know. I'm not sure if this is truly his mother on the outside, but for the situation, it was a visual, and it was natural that she was somewhere.
Yeah.
And he didn't know where he was really going. He was a very young boy, you know. He didn't know what was going to come.
That's right. Denise, what about you?
You know, leaving the safety of my neighborhood and my friends and going to a place that I didn't know, I think the most vivid memory is one of the days when I got off the bus. There was an older woman who was wearing like a house duster bathrobe, and she had curlers in her hair, and she was spitting at all of us as we went by. And as soon as I got up to the top of the stairs, my friend grabbed me and said, "That's my grandmother. I'm sorry." And it was so hard, because here was my friend that I made on the first day of school, who every day waited at that door for me, and her grandmother was down at the foot of the stairs and spit at me and my brother and all the other children. But she apologized, and we just, you know, moved on. But it was sad. It was very sad.
Yeah, when we had our previous conversation, you just talked to me about, you know, these were adults. These were adults who were terrorizing children.
I was 13 years old, and this woman thought it was okay. My brother was 15, to spit at us.
Horrifying.
There were just no words.
It's horrifying. Want to look at the classroom photo that Uli took, and I know what strikes me about that photo. But Uli, I kind of wanted to ask you what you were thinking about when you shot that photo.
Well, like I mentioned before, I try to be invisible in the class so the kids get natural. And they were natural in this class. And obviously the teacher was asking questions. And a few of the children raised their hand. Now they are all white children, which I didn't think about it at the time. I was only waiting for some action. But I like the mood, and the black children are attentive. Everybody's attentive. And so I like this image. I think it symbolizes the mixed class, you know, for the time.
And Denise, what do you see when you look at that image?
You know, I see scared faces. You know, I don't know if that was the first day of school or if that was a different time. Mm-hmm. But when you leave your family and your friends and you go through that barricade and all that you have to do to get into the classroom, you're in a little bit of shock. Mm-hmm. And it takes a little while. And, you know, I think the teachers were trying to do the best they could, but it would take us a minute to really gather ourselves and be able to feel safe. And so not participating sometimes was what we had to do. We just had to take that time and pull ourselves together. And it makes me really sad to see this, that the white children are engaged and raising their hand, and the black children are still trying to pull it together. And that's how I see the picture. Because I remember sitting in that chair and, teachers trying to, rattle off, questions to you, and you're just not there yet. You need that downtime for a minute just to absorb what just happened to me. Is this going to happen again on my way out? And then you were hoping that a bomb scare didn't get called in, a fire didn't happen, because then they'd usher you right out the room, out into that mob again, onto those buses. So you never knew. So you were a little hesitant to really engage. It took me probably about 3 weeks to a month to really sort of settle in.
And Bill, now that we have decades of reflection since that photo was taken, what do you see?
Well, I think Uli and Denise have summed it up pretty well, but the variety of mood, I mean, the little girl on the right with a sideway glance, the kid behind her totally tuned out, the girl in the middle just looks shell-shocked, the white kids participating, others kind of tuned out. It's a photo you can stay with and just look around, and it really makes you feel like you're there and feeling the different emotions that must have been swirling around at the time.
Yeah, these were really powerful images, all the ones that you were able to click through. No, I was telling Bill these are powerful images. Before we move on to Q&A, I just wanted to be able to get final thoughts from each of you, just about this time period, about living it, about documenting it, about reflecting on it. If you would, like to start, go, Bill, if you would like to just give your final thoughts.
Well, it was an incredibly important time for Boston. It affected so many people, fundamentally affected the education system. It was, to be there, and I was not there, obviously, but as a journalist was, I would say, if you were there, it was a privilege to document it in a fair and honest way, to move readers to understand the power of the moment.
Uli?
Well, if I look back at it, what sticks to me, it's many, many years ago, it was all this hate which was there, which was just against my strengths. Like I mentioned before, that I looked generally for beauty, and here I could sense so much hate, or the whole feeling. And like you said, it was that time. There was a lot of racial upset, Yeah.
Denise?
I was set up to fail, but I did not fail. And if I had it to do again, I would do it again over and over again. My name is Denise Pruitt, and I am a product of the Boston Public Schools, and I am proud that I graduated from Hyde Park High School during desegregation.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to Q&A.
Hi, this is for Bill. Why don't you send reporters into families' homes in September, coming up at the beginning of the next school year? Question mark.
We try, my motto is just to get into people's homes, spend time with the family, as Uli said, I think you said a mouse, like a mouse? So yes. You said like a fly on the wall, and observe, become quiet, become Uli and not, oh, there's the Globe photographer, where they let their guard down. Oftentimes when we say, we have to go, or they say, are you done? And then you say, I'm done, then you say, oh, okay, great. And then you may say, can I stay a little bit longer if you don't mind?
That's when you get the...
And they say, oh, okay. And then they start talking to you, and then you make your best work, because they become comfortable. They become real. They're not guarded. They're not putting on a veneer that's not true. So we as our motto is to try to get in. I always joke with photographers that are working on year-long projects that if you can get into their bedroom, you know you're in. So we just try to wear people down in the kindest, most respectful way, and just document from the inside out, because otherwise there's so much work being done from a distance, especially now, and it feels almost like grab shots, voyeuristic, and it has no depth or substance. It's about conveying emotion is what really moves people. Those are the best photos, but we will try to get in next year.
And we did get in this year. So we were documenting some migrant students who were living in a shelter, and we were able to, part of my team went out, and Bill's team went out and spent the evening with them the night before, as well as the next morning on their way to school, then for hours in the school. So
It has become incredibly difficult now to break through barriers. Hospitals, shelters, for obvious reasons. Even if you talk to, you're blue in your face and explain that you will follow any rules you have for HIPAA and for privacy. We're doing this with all respect. And once in a while, people will allow us. But it's amazing in this world now where everyone is so on guard and terrified of a million things, which is understandable. It just makes it much more difficult. But we keep hammering away and do the best we can.
I'm going to take one online question before we move to the next in-person question. To the panelists in general, how do you think Boston would react today if desegregation and busing was happening?
Me? Boston today? I don't know how Boston would react today. It's so hard. I have not been in the city that much, so I'm kind of isolated, working in my garden and walking my dog.
And that's okay. Denise?
I think parents would not put their kids on the bus. I've heard a lot of people say that the violence, the trauma, is just not worth it to them. So I think if it happened today, I think parents would find alternatives. I think homeschooling would become very popular.
Okay, next audience question. They're coming around.
Hi, I was a new transplant to Boston in 1976 and immediately got a job teaching at Madison Park High School when it was in its temporary quarters. So that makes it 2 years after the beginning of the busing. I have to say that as a teacher in the school, first of all, I was very naive. I didn't really follow all of the violence and everything. When I arrived, I just went to work. And things were very normal in school, but also outside. So I'm wondering, how long did it take before all of that hatred and violence, before it settled down and went away? Because when I was teaching, yes, there were things that were different. We had to take roll by race, and some schools still had the metal detectors. We didn't. But if you walk through my school, you would probably not think it was any different than the school I had been teaching in Rochester, New York.
So I lived with it all of my high school years. The violence, the adults, the throwing, the fires, the bomb scares, all the years I was there. It didn't end. And as far as I know, it continued for many years after. I think parents were angry, and that's how they showed their anger.
Here we have another audience question for Denise. What did your mother tell you and your brother to prepare you for school the night before at the kitchen table?
So we had been a part of the whole lawsuit. We had gone to meetings with my mother. We understood what was going to happen. My mother, even the day before school, put us in the car, drove us to Hyde Park High School, let us see the school in advance. And she said to my brother and I, "Be brave. You can do this." And we knew we could, because we come from a strong mother who we saw fight for everything that she had in life. And so we knew, even though we were on the younger side, as I said, I'm number 7 of 9, my brother was 8 of 9, we knew that we had the fight to fight. We weren't going to let my mother down, number one. She worked so hard. And so at the table, she said to us, be brave, know that I'm going to be with you, and do what you need to do. But what she did is she raised a lady and a gentleman. And we were not going there to fight. We were not going there to be rude. We were going to show people that we were raised with to be polite. And even if a person wasn't nice to us, we respected them and we treated them with respect. And so I think we did my mother proud. She has told me this over and over again, that we handled ourselves very gracefully. We never got into any fights. We never got into any confrontations. And that's a lot for many, many years of people shouting at you. But, you know, I think we handled it the best that we could.
Next audience question. They're coming with the mic.
This refers to the first online question in a way. Bill talked about trying to find the texture, the emotional affect, the truth in what was really going on. And I'm wondering how in this day and age, with the media landscape we have and the media resources we have and all of the social media, et cetera, and the instant has to happen now, what are the challenges facing the news organizations in trying to do what you would like them to do?
Well, it's incredibly challenging. In the photo department at the Globe, we consider ourselves truly blessed to work in a news operation that values and is willing to invest the time necessary to tell those kind of stories. It's not obviously all we do, but it's always something we are doing. It might be one person, it might be 3 people. I mean, we have to balance our resources. Clearly, the industry is moving into more, better, faster, quicker, driven by subscriptions, by traffic. So we are always working at that, but we always will commit a percentage of our time and efforts to document really important stories that are happening now that are just important to our times. And like I said, we consider ourselves very lucky to work at the Globe where that is valued and it is encouraged. It's just a matter of, in a time of ever decreasing resources, it's a matter of just trying to, how do you parse out your staff to get everything that needs to get done that day and not ignore it. I will fight tooth and nail never to abandon that, for sure.
Next online question is, when did busing end and when was Metco introduced? And I do know the answers to that if you don't know that. So Metco was actually introduced years before busing started, I believe 1966, and it was for the same reason that the lawsuit happened, was that black families wanted better education for their children, and so they bused them to, I think it was one district in the beginning, and then it became others later. But they wanted them to have a good education that they weren't getting in Boston. And then busing ended in 1988. And so to dovetail to that, the next question that someone asked online was, what does the panel think about where BPS is today? And I think that's kind of a broad question, but I think it's kind of asking academically where do we see Boston schools today, and i.e. did busing work? Does anyone want to tackle that bear?
As a college professor, I get to see a lot of the students from the Boston Public Schools, and they are not well prepared when they come in, I'm sad to say. But I do think that there's work to be done. I do think that there are hardworking people who are trying to get that work done. And I do see that at some point, I hope in my lifetime, I get to see the changes that we've fought so hard for.
You know, just as the education editor, I can say my team's name is called The Great Divide. And we examine inequities in Boston and throughout Massachusetts. Schools are still unequal. They're still segregated. You, in a district where the vast majority of children are black and brown, you still have a majority of white student schools. And academic outcomes are uneven, they're unequal. So I can, not just as an opinion, but as a fact, that's kind of where the state of BPS schools are today. There, like Denise said, there's a lot of good things going on. My sister is an educator in Texas, so I have a tremendous respect for educators, but it's a hard thing to overcome. Next, in-person question, just raise your hands so they can see you.
Back here, David Reno, member of the Athenaeum. My former minister, the Reverend Stephen Kendricks, wrote a book called Sarah's Long Walk about the desegregation case in the 19th century, which first used the phrase separate but equal. I wonder if you know of the book. It was published, I'd say, about 10 years ago. First question. Second question, for those of us in a book place, J. Anthony Lewis's coverage and reportage about the desegregation and using three families, sort of like a three-generational Victorian novel. Have you read that book, and what are your comments on either or both of the two books? If the first one, Sarah's Long Walk, I don't know if you know it or not. Second one, the one by J. Anthony Lucas. Well, have you read them, and what is your impression of them?
I have not read them.
And Lucas, is that The Common Ground? Is that? Common Ground. Yeah, The Common Ground. Have you read that one?
I have read The Common Ground.
And I did read that as well. I did not read Sarah's Walk.
My book club is about to read The Common Ground.
Next question.
I was absolutely thunderstruck by your story about how your friend apologized for the despicable behavior of her grandmother. What do you think went on in the head of those adults that allowed all those people to pick on children about the most reprehensible thing that there is? What snake turned over in their minds? Thank you.
I wish I knew, because then I could solve world peace. I wish I knew. I really do. You know, and I think in hindsight, I think back and I wonder, you know, sometimes I wish we could interview some of those people now who had that behavior then and ask them that question. Because, you know, when you're a child and you're going through it, you just don't know. You don't understand what's happening. I mean, I know my grandma would never do that. And so I didn't know, but I knew that this student, the girl that became my friend, she was sincere. And, you know, as I said, we are still friends to this day. And I know when she apologized, she meant it. And it wasn't just her. There were many, many students who I was in school with who would point out their parents, their uncles, their, you know, their dads. And, you know, they were embarrassed by their behavior, but we were children. We didn't have a voice back then. And so I would love to hear from some of those people who are out on the street and doing those things to tell us, you know, here we are 50 years later. How do they feel about their behavior? And I do want to say, I never cried once at school in all those years, but I cried every day when I went home.
I'm not sure if anyone would know the answer to this next online question, but the person asks, were there any black police officers at this time? And did the children being bused respond differently if black police were present?
I never once saw a black policeman the whole time.
I never saw one either.
I just did a quick online search, and it appears that there was at least black officers who were part of the force at that time. The first one being from, I think, in the 1920s, but I don't know at that time either. Next on in-person question.
I was living in the South End at the time of busing and would go to the bus stops to try to help kids get on the buses. I think one of the things that is very clear from the photos is that you're showing the white people very upset. And you are not showing at least in these photos, that black people were cooperating. And and there were very few black policemen at the time, and there was a lot of white policemen being very aggressive towards blacks, and there was a lot of crime on blacks at the time. And I'm not questioning the Globe in terms of, did they look at this backdrop of racial inequality in Boston when they were reporting and doing the photographs?
I can't speak to what was going on through the editor's mind then, but I think it goes back to my point of this. I think sometimes, when you go back in time and look at photography, oftentimes the subtlety is not there, the in-depth time spent is not there, the obvious is documented. One other thing that occurred to me is, where are the photos of people that left the city because of busing? You know, how many people left Boston because of integration? I mean, what a huge part of the story that either we never shot it, or we didn't see it, or maybe it was so quiet it didn't rise. But I never saw it. But yeah, I think as time's gone on, I think I can only speak for photojournalism. The people, photographers have become more, they're photojournalists. They're thinking like a writer. They're thinking, what is the story and how do I document it? Even if the photo you're going to pursue is maybe not the sexiest, wildest, intense photo, if it's an important part of the story, you can't have the same photos over and over when you tell a series of photos. You need some of the details and some of the sidebar, offshoot angles, you know, that round out the coverage. But I agree with you.
Can I just add to that? Not only did I never see a black policeman, I never saw a black teacher.
Oh, I did, excuse me, I did have a good, somewhere I have a very good photograph of a black teacher. He was an elegant dressed gentleman.
At South Boston High.
At South Boston High.
Not at Hyde Park High.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
They had one.
And I can add, at the time, now it's 50 years past, we were sent, get a picture or get some pictures. We did not have the time of spending lingering around, because I got called to the next. I mean, after between a certain time, you have one assignment and then you dash off to the next assignment. So it was a little different time of, you know, being so thorough and looking so much in depth.
Well, I just thank you all for being here. We are out of time. Is Tim still here? Tim, did you want to make some comments?
No, I was just going to suggest, hi y'all, that Bill talk a little bit about the process by which we went to get to these pictures, which will help with that. Leanne and Colby found thousands. We put them all on a wall. And we had them on the wall, for 2-3 months, Bill? And so everybody in the newsroom could walk by and see all the pictures and kind of relate to it, so we could make sure that we were seeing it from both sides. So I was going to have Bill talk about that.
I did mention you, right, Tim, when I was talking about the department? Tim
That's
Rasmussen.
that's his boss.
Tim was instrumental in the edit, and yes, we poured over thousands and kept culling. And the way it works is it's always you end up focusing on the weakest. I imagine that's the same with writing, editing, and cutting it out, and therefore making what's left stronger. And to your point, we found a lot of conflict. We found a lot of buses and policemen, and you know. But that's what made me think about the quiet moments that were so important. But yeah, with the public, I think the way we had it hanging on the wall, and that was, Tim's idea was a great one, because we had a lot of journalists that remembered those times, lived through those times, that actually was giving us live feedback on what they thought of the coverage and what was missing, and it was good to share it kind of as in an open forum in the room. But it was definitely a team effort in the photo department. It was a huge undertaking, and Colby and Lan were especially valuable in digging through the archives and finding some hidden gems and all the other stuff that we had already known about.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you, panelists, for being here, and thank you to the audience for coming.